You're listening to the Valley Current.
So I'm sure he's going to take Florida. So I'll just tell you a joke, because I punchline the joke. I went there to buy a bike. The guy was essentially showing me all the guns, trying to sell me a gun. I said, I'm not a resident of Florida yet, but maybe I'm going to become a resident of Florida because there's no state taxes. And look, we can still do Zoom. We could still connect with each other. We couldn't connect with each other in person. I mean, I'm saying this. And the guy says, well, come back when you get your Florida license. So I said, well, I saw a bunch of bikes outside. I said, well, what about those bikes? Really crappy used bikes. He said, those are classics. I said, what do you mean classics? He said, you see that bike out there? It was an old Raleigh bike. I offered him $50. He laughed at me. He said, I can show you that on eBay. That's a classic. That's $500. I said, for a classic bike? He said, you can't get a Raleigh bike anymore. You won't be able to find one. And then he said, you want to know the most expensive thing in the stores? I said, what? He has an original Schwinn Stingray with a banana seat from the 1950s, the original one. He says it's $5,000. $5,000. That bike was probably $50 in the 1950s. He said, if you're a collector of bikes, this is the bike for your collection. So it's quite an interesting thing. But tell me as you sit there in Sea Ranch, hopefully protected from all this, how are you thinking about your plan B? Because it seems to me the lesson and maybe the topic that we should focus on is, should everyone be making a plan B for evacuating if that's what's necessary?
Yes, I'm going to take the fastest transportation to Vancouver, Canada.
Oh, you go up to Vancouver. That would be your choice?
Absolutely. Have you ever been there?
I've been there. It's a beautiful city, but I would assume they would at some point stop the inflow of even visitors, right? Wouldn't they?
I would hopefully go there as a professional, and I don't know why I would be denied entrance.
Okay, so you're saying go there on really almost a permanent basis, like rent the house or sell the house or do something like that, right?
Of course. Yeah.
But the weather is cold. That's ski territory, right? In the winter, that's
far more tolerable than living in a fascist country where
you're not focusing on the environmental issues as much as the political issues.
Well, of course, that's the biggest danger. It's a far bigger danger than weather. We're headed toward a fascist dictatorship. It's perfectly clear.
Well, do you think, I'll tell you a funny story that just connects the dots for me. There's actually a website that tries to match Americans with Canadian women, American men with Canadian women, and vice versa, Canadian men with American women, where the goal is try to get some sort of dual citizenship, dual passport, dual whatever. And it's almost a facade of you really are just buying your way into more freedom. Like you could say it's an arranged marriage, or you could say it's got a prenuptial agreement, or you could say it's convenience. But literally the website promotes on the website, wouldn't it be nice to have a plan B?
Yeah.
For both parties, like both parties on both sides.
Yeah.
And maybe that's what people do these days. Maybe that's what kids do. If I'm going to get married, I got to get some benefits out of it beyond the normal benefits of marriage that presumably are associated with love and affection and so on. It's like marry someone in the EU. Now you have an EU passport, or you have an EU freedom ticket if you want to go to the EU. I know people that do that. They just want to have more freedom. They don't want to pay their way. You probably could pay your way, or you would say, I'm going to teach at the university, or I'm going to do research at a university, right?
Sure.
And you would say that's politically stable. The economics seem good. I don't know that the weather is as good, but the weather is pretty crappy right now if you're dealing with fires all the time, right?
Well, I'm not dealing with fires, thank God, at least not yet.
Right. So Len, what's your prediction about what will happen here? Are you worried that Biden's not going to win? I think he did a great job in the latest acceptance. I don't even know why they had Bernie Sanders up there as though he was going to get some votes. And I thought the video they showed of the grandkids and the kids, and of course his son, who died at such a young age, like 52 years old or something, or 46 years old or something. I thought that was an amazing way to give him credibility, to look at how fond his family was of him in the acceptance convention, the last day of the convention, the last day of the virtual convention.
Yeah, I thought that the whole thing was well done, considering the fact that there is no precedent for doing anything like that.
Right, right.
And I thought we have nothing to compare it to, but it was well done, I thought.
Right.
It's going to be very interesting to see how the Republicans do the same thing. Trump has already hired a hall, maybe you heard about this, a building that from the outside looks like the Supreme Court building.
Oh, is that right?
James Monroe building, or I believe it's named after a president or some historical figure.
In North Carolina, or where is it?
No, 1 block away from the Trump Hotel in Washington, D.C.
Oh, Washington, D.C. Okay, wow.
Which was done in order to have the people in attendance, and there will be lots of Republicans unmasked in attendance, who will be staying at his hotel.
Oh, okay. It's a
that mistake, that accidentally on purpose, without saying that it was on purpose, raised its room rates to a minimum of $750 a night for a single room, going up to $3,000 for larger rooms and suites.
Wow.
Which is way higher than the normal charges. So everything he does
I'm sure they can afford it.
To line his pockets at the expense of citizens of this country. And his Republican followers have no understanding of these motives. It's just uncanny. It's hard to believe. And that just happened today. So he's also planning hoping to get a permit, which hasn't been granted yet, to hold fireworks on the mall in Washington. And also he's going to hopefully deliver his acceptance speech, if it comes to that, hopefully not, in the Rose Garden, which is technically not illegal, but morally against the understanding that we've had for 250 years that the White House is sacred grounds and should not be politicized.
Right, right. It seems to me it should be illegal. It seems to me that that's like doing stuff too close to a polling booth. You know, you're crossing the line of church and state, as it were, when you do stuff like that.
Yeah, well, you know better than me that the reason we have laws is because people don't have morals.
Pretty much. But if you think about kind of the risk, I guess the risk here is that Trump does something like defunds the post office. I know that's been turned back, but stuff that makes the election less than democratic, and it seems as though it's almost like he's a rat that's been cornered, and as a result, he's like, I got to do whatever I got to do the way I do it to justify it. And maybe your point is correct, that the correct plan B is not just move to another state, move to another country.
Absolutely.
Move to another country. And then you get into, do you move to another country or do you move to a place like Puerto Rico? Because you're still going to be taxed by the U.S. So is the ultimate civil disobedience to move to Puerto Rico and not pay federal taxes?
Not in Puerto Rico. You don't pay income tax in Puerto Rico. That is an option that many wealthy people are entertaining.
Right. No, and I think it's an act of civil disobedience. It's like saying, it's not actually disobedient. It's more like saying, I'm not giving up my citizenship and I'm not going to pay taxes in the US. So I'm going to get all my Medicare benefits, my Medicaid benefits. I'm going to fly in for medical treatments in Florida. I'll fly back out, but I'm going to go to Puerto Rico. I'm not going to pay federal taxes. I'm not going to pay any state taxes. I'm going to pay Puerto Rico 4%. I've done a podcast on this, and it's not a loophole. It really is kind of the way the law works. And I think a lot of people who travel a lot are just going to say, I travel so much that it's not worth whatever the additional incremental days. You could live, say, in California part-time for 89 days, and then the rest of the year, you're either in Puerto Rico or somewhere else. But it's kind of a statement that you no longer have the hegemony of the state is gone. The reason to pay taxes is you believe in the state system is providing adequate services to justify the implied contract. The implied contract is broken because the services are broken and the economy is broken and the environment is broken, and you trace it to leadership. You know, Trump is not the only failed leader in this story. You could say this stuff started literally maybe in the Nixon era, or maybe even before Nixon. If you say, you know, Nixon inherited a bunch of problems too, but we're not doing the full history. But let's take a few more minutes to just wrap up. I know we prepared for a different topic, but these urgencies have happened. And I thought this could be a good topic generally to just talk about the state of affairs in the country. But what else was on your mind for today, so we could plan something even as early as tomorrow if you have time to actually focus on the biology issues? What was on your mind for today?
I didn't have anything specifically in mind, but what did occur as being critically important is what I mentioned earlier that you also heard, and that was the attempt or the statement by Trump implying his interference with FDA medical and biological decisions, that he would usurp and decide himself. That is one of the most outrageous statements and interests on his part that he has done so far.
Right, and I think your main point in that, in part, is that the Republican Party itself seems to be turning a blind eye to a degree of craziness that is hard to understand. Like, you would think Mitch McConnell and others would say, you can't do that. You just can't do that. That crosses a boundary. That crosses a boundary, right?
There are many other instances in the past 3.5 years where the Republicans showed total lack of understanding of the difference between right and wrong, and a failure to stop this maniac who has already ruined the Republican Party. They have to redo this party from its very origins if they lose this election. And they have the reasons that have been given for their following Trump are very difficult to understand. What are they afraid of? If they get together and decide that they're going to prohibit him from doing these insane things, then there is no threat to what they will do, and that also applies to their constituents. It's just very difficult to believe that there are Republicans in the Senate and also in the House, and also in the Supreme Court, by the way, who are incapable of understanding that the United States of America is about to become a fascist country. That is I never thought I would ever say that, but here we are, and it's at our doorstep at the moment, unless we have a terrific, unequivocal victory on November 3rd.
Right. I think you're absolutely right. And I just kind of wonder at what level we will continue to see Trump move more and more towards fascism while Biden moves more and more to the middle. Like, you could argue one of the things Biden is doing is trying to cover everything in a way that sounds sort of like it's great for everyone. You know, everything is going to be beautiful for everyone. I mean, he covered a lot of broad brush across the board, probably very effectively, given it was only about 28 minutes or maybe 30 minutes of speaking. But when you think about it, he's got to bridge a big divide between the left and the right. And the left was moving very, very far left with Bernie Sanders, and the right keeps moving what looks like very far right. And I just don't know kind of, you know, where we end up and whether we end up in a good place or not. I mean, it's going to be an interesting question.
Well, as far as I'm concerned, anything between the far left and the far right of the left is much better than anything the Republicans have to do.
Right, right. Well, I will end on this subject. I sent an email earlier today to a friend in Healdsburg, and she wrote just back a minute ago saying by email, I just saw it on my phone, she said two things. One, she said she was evacuated and most of Healdsburg has been evacuated on Tuesday, but her house, she's told, is still there, and it's not on fire, and nothing is that close to it. But I guess Healdsburg's been evacuated. She was up kind of in the woodsy part of Healdsburg. And then the second thing she said is, well, if the politicians, you know, don't end up tearing it all down before the fire gets to it, like her view is similar to yours, and she's been a pretty conservative Republican for many years, but I think those are exactly the kinds of people that are going to turn on Trump, because they're going to say you've gone way too far and way too far in a direction of fascism than could ever be allowed in this country. So I think he's playing to a base that maybe is here in Florida and a few other states, but it really isn't at all the majority Republican view. At least that's what it seems to me.
Well, let's hope that one of the interesting trends might be today in respect to the number of House Republicans who vote for the bill that is up for a voting right now, that will fund, for I think several billions of dollars, the post office.
Right, right. It seems to me that we're kind of in a period of time where we're going to look back on this and say, man, this was really quite an aberration for the last 4 years. And maybe it'll be an aberration for a bit longer as the virus continues, because I think your original prediction of the virus probably running through most of 2021 is now kind of the general presumption, don't you think?
Definitely.
Right?
Definitely. There's no way that it's going to end in this year.
You would probably say it's even going to probably go into 2022.
Well into 2021. Well into 2021.
Right. Well, let's end on the note of saying a prayer for all the people that are in hospice. There's a lot of them, and I'm seeing a lot of them. And I witnessed for the first time, and I said this to my mom. I said, look, when I grew up as a Catholic in a Catholic school being taught by Catholic nuns, I became a Catholic altar boy. And I used to do Catholic funerals they'd pull me out of the school for an hour, and you'd put on the gown and the vestings and the whatnot, the black long sort of button suit, button robe, and then the white, sort of like a white angel kind of thing. I was always a big kid for my age. I'm still a big guy, but for about 5 years, I want to say from about age 7 to about age 12 or 13, so 5 or 6 years, I was a Catholic altar boy. I had never seen last rites. I heard about last rites. I heard about priests going in at the last minute to say prayers and the like, but I never witnessed. I have witnessed multiple last rites over the last week in the hospice, in different people coming in and the priest coming in to say it's time for me to give last rites. And then like the next day you hear they wheel the guy out. They basically, I guess these are all, you know, the day of death becomes more obvious as these nurse and nurse practitioners and physicians assistants observe changes in physiology as death comes upon one's door, who's already with a comorbidity of one type or another, independent of the C19 cases that I think also exist inside of hospices.
Well, I had a hospice here at my home for my wife. And she died here at home in the presence of two of my daughters and myself after we were forced into a hospice situation because her heart failure could not be further treated.
Right. But right there in the house you're in, right there in Sea Ranch, right?
Absolutely. And that was our purpose, and our goal was to make her as comfortable as possible. Fortunately, that condition is painless, so she did not suffer pain, but and we did keep her in as comfortable a position as we could. And her heart failed very suddenly, which was fortunate. And so a good part of my family and I experienced hospice very personally.
Well, I have to say, I think that's the right way to go. I mean, I think the tubes and the machines, the equipment's very loud. I mean, you feel like you're in some industrial space. It's a lot of equipment, a lot of beeping, a lot of, like, you know, it's just not, you know, it's just, to me, if you're getting ready for some sort of roller coaster ride into some new state of being or state of the universe or whatever you become after death, I don't think you want it with a bunch of machines clanking around or the breathing stuff or the feeding stuff or the in and out stuff that's all over the place. It just seems like you become part of a machine. You almost become integrated into a machine, and the machine is alive and you're dying, but the machine is alive and spitting out the last breath. And it seems at the margin we spend way too much money, way too much money on that last 3 months, last 6 months, last whatever. I'm sure that the person that's there, you know, trying to breathe in his last, you know, video or his last movie, because that's all they do is watch TV. I mean, it's not like they're doing anything fabulous for the world. There are some funny moments that happen that we'll save for another time, but.
And fortunately, my wife never went, she was never hospitalized.
Which is good, which is the right outcome, right?
And she suffered no pain. She breathed normally. It was a death that was as kind and gentle as possible.
It's the way you want to do it. I think it's the way you want to do it. And yet we don't really spend a lot of time thinking about what's the way to do it. We, you know, it's like put it off. But, you know, my brother is being very sober about, hey, I don't want to be cremated. I don't want to be incinerated. I want to be buried. I've got the money, or someone's got the money. The money's in some account somewhere. My mom should take care of it. And my mom's like, hey, if that's what he wants, that's what he wants, even though it's kind of.
Why does he prefer having his body destroyed by microorganisms, insect larvae, and some small vertebrates?
I think people think somehow that you're providing nutrients to a tree that's nearby or some other. I mean, look, there was a patent that issued. It's a funny patent. If I could bring it up on the screen, I would, but I'm not that.
Well, that's exactly what Ruth wanted. She wanted to be cremated and her ashes placed beneath a redwood tree in the forest behind my house.
Right. Now you might say, or one might say, that's kind of an interesting question. Do the ashes provide nutrients, or do the ashes just really just provide no
Well,
nutrients?
of course they do. I mean, they provide nutrients to plant life and not to animal life in general. But that's not the critical thing. I mean, the atoms in your body and my body today, and in her body and others, some of those atoms have passed through other people in former generations. Maybe even the religious figures that you worship and who had a mortal existence, the atoms in their body could in fact be part of your body.
Right, but people don't get that. People don't get that at the level that you get that because of your training. People don't get that notion that essentially there's transfer.
Probably true, but
right.
Yes, the atoms in our body, which are constantly turning over, most of them, when they turn over, they have to be obtained in a similar configuration from other sources. And those sources could be other people. I mean, it's a kind of cannibalism if you want to think of it in those terms.
Right. I wanted to bring up on the screen as kind of a final way to do this, but your point is, hey, Richie, the difference between the nutrients happening through microorganisms that will penetrate that casket and make their way to the disintegration of your body. Just cut to the chase, right?
It's going to take a century. The money is spent, in my judgment, and I respect his judgment. The money spent on the caskets and the funerals is going to be enormous.
Right. It's like a 5-figure number. I want to say it's like 15,000, something like that.
Well, it wasn't for Ruth because that's not what she wanted. She wanted to be cremated, and so do I. The Orthodox Jews have a custom where they are to be buried in nothing more than a pine box. And that's how it's been for 2,000 years.
Right. And the pine box is supposed to be something that disintegrates pretty quickly, right?
Yes. And also they have to be buried within 24 hours. And
so it's pretty fast, right?
That was done for a very important reason, because when that rule was established, there was a belief, no proof, but a belief that disease would be spread if a cadaver sat around for more than 24 hours. It's not probably.
So I want to show you sort of like very quickly, because we're covering a subject that really probably needs to be a separate podcast. I'm going to show you something. It's unfortunately in Chinese, and I'll get the actual version in English at some point, and we can spend more time on this. But this is a patent that issued in China. And what it is, I'm going to show the drawing first. The patents in China tend to be as short as this, 6 or 7 pages, 3 pages of drawings. The idea is that you have this little house that is sort of the monument, right? And the monument, inside the monument, there's a sapling of a tree, right? There's a sapling of a tree that is going to burst through that little house to create, the ashes are put under this little monument. And the idea is that you're going to make the person's atoms, the remaining atoms that might be in those ashes. I don't know. I always thought those ashes were pretty dead, but this is the Chinese text. If we went and we looked at the U.S. Comparative U.S. Statement, it would be along the lines of, this is a green way to generate a tree. See, this novel, green, and environmental friendly tree burial method for social funeral service. That's like broken English for a novel, green burial method. And the claims are pretty much about a way to create this family members are essentially nourishing a tree. And it's sort of like you could argue it probably shouldn't be patented at all because there's not a lot here, but they did get an issued patent on a burial method associated with a degradable what they call cinerary casket, evergreen seedling wood item that allows the heatable adobe sleeping platform is then covered with soil, and various things happen that allow the tree to grow out of it. And I haven't read the whole thing, but I've seen this years ago in a slightly different context. This one is a 2016 patent that originated in China. So maybe it's still an application and it hasn't become a patent yet, but that's what we're looking at. People are coming up with these new ideas that allow people to do green things, like take ashes and turn them into some form of compost that's used to aid the tree.
Well, it's far simpler, far cheaper to be cremated and have your ashes put privately by a redwood tree. And that's exactly what Ruth wanted, and that's what we did.
Yeah,
I will do the same thing.
Right. Did you go out?
That does what that patent wants to do.
Right. Did you go out? Did you go out to Muir Woods, or where'd you go?
Well, we have a redwood forest behind my house, a huge forest, second growth redwoods. It was acquired actually by the Sea Ranch a few years after we arrived here. And there are paths, walking paths in that forest. And Ruth spent time with her girlfriends, her lady friends here, walking those paths. And that's what she wanted. And I understand it completely, to the point of wanting to do, having to have it done to myself.
Right.
It all you do is you pay the $1,500 to the society.
Neptune Society?
To the Neptune Society. Right. They pick
there are much cheaper competitors now. I think the latest price I saw in Mountain View is as low as $4.99.
Well, that could be, but you are never guaranteed that the ashes that they send back to you are the ashes of the person who provided those ashes.
Right.
And not one you think they are.
Right.
So that's it could be a problem. On the other hand, for me, it's not a problem because I have a completely different view about death than I think most people do. People who think they're going to go somewhere or meet somebody after death has to require a question like, where do you think you were last night at 3:30 in the morning? Where was your brain? Or where were you in the year 1492? You can answer that question, then you will have a good basis for believing that you will be somewhere.
Right. So let's wrap up with this notion. If you look at the history of this Chinese patent, it dates prior art that dates back to 1996. I think I actually saw a US patent back in the 1980s that was talking about this green notion of putting ashes under trees, on the side of trees. And what happened with the internet is they now, the hook to this is they now tie the tree to a Wi-Fi connection of the tree to the internet so that people can watch the tree grow in real time on a video camera. So they're putting like cameras on the trees and tying them to the internet and saying the family could say grandfather is here, that sort of thing. So it's quite a statement, you know, this notion that people will somehow associate the tree with granddad, and you know where it's going to go next. Eventually that tree will talk with copies of this video or this audio saying, hey, this is what Professor Hayflick had to say about this subject. And it'll be like the tree becomes alive based on your children or your grandchildren saying, oh yeah, we want that tree to be alive, but you're not going to do it this way. But if you did it this way, it would become like an animated tree. I'm sure that's not what we're going to do, but maybe our kids or grandkids will do it. Anyway, thanks, Len, for spending the time with me. Okay. We'll meet up again, hopefully on Friday next week. And I don't know if I'll still be here.
Tune in next time on The Valley Current.